The colt was shaking so hard his legs barely held him up, yet no one in the New Holland auction yard cared enough to even look in his direction. Men walked past him the way folks step around a broken crate in the road. He was just something to avoid. But when Susan Jackson saw him, something inside her stopped cold, as if the world around her had gone silent in one sudden breath. It was the way he looked back at her, not wild, not angry, not alive at all, like a soul that had already packed its bags and given up on being saved. That look felt like a hand closing around her heart. It pulled her forward before she even realized she'd taken a step. Dust hung thick in the Wyoming air. Horses shifted in narrow pens, hooves scraping against old wood. Flies buzzed, cattle bawled, men shouted bids, and the sun beat down fierce on the worn metal roofs. But somehow, in the middle of all that noise, the small, starved colt stood in a pocket of quiet. Lot 113, a number slapped on him like a final insult. He was little more than bones, with a hide stretched too tight over them. His coat was a muddy brown, patchy and dull. His ribs pushed through his skin. Rope burns and old scars covered his legs and sides. He had no shine, no spark, nothing that would make a rancher pause and say, maybe he's worth the trouble. Jed, a rancher with a thick mustache and a voice rough enough to sandwood, stepped beside Susan. "That one ain't worth the leather on your boots," he muttered. "No sense in throwing money at something that's already halfway in the ground." He spat a dark streak into the dust and folded his arms. Susan did not answer him. She couldn't. Her chest felt tight as she stared at the colt. The world told her he was worthless. The world had said the same about her since Harry died 1 year ago. Folks whispered she didn't have what it took to run the ranch alone. They treated her like a shadow of who she once was. A ghost, still wandering around a life that no longer fit. Maybe that was why she couldn't look away from the colt. They were both running low on hope. The auctioneer rattled off the colt's number with no pride at all. Lot 113. Grade colt. Sold as is. Where is? Startin' at $50. Do I hear 50? No one moved. Hats tilted down, boots scraped the dirt. A few men coughed to fill the silence. The colt didn't even lift his head. Susan heard Harry's voice in her memory, warm and steady. The voice that used to fill their ranch with life. "Look closer, Susan. Every horse has a story worth hearing. You just gotta be quiet enough to listen." She swallowed hard. Her palms felt sweaty. Her throat felt thick. 50, she said. Her voice was small, almost frightened, but it carried through the hot air like a bullet. Heads turned. Jed's jaw dropped. 50 once, 50 twice, sold to the lady in the back. The auctioneer barked, not even pretending to be surprised. He slammed the gavel, sealing her choice. As Susan walked toward the pen, she could feel eyes following her. Some curious, some pitying, some shaking their heads like she'd lost her mind for good. "You just bought yourself a ghost," Jed said quietly. "Hope you know what you're doing." But she didn't. Her knees felt weak as she unlatched the gate. Fear rose in her chest like a tide. The colt pressed himself into the far corner, trembling. He expected a rope or a blow. His eyes showed nothing but surrender. But Susan didn't raise a hand. She didn't push. She stood still, breathing slow, her heart aching in a way she thought had stopped months ago. "It's okay," she whispered. The words felt rusty in her mouth, as if she hadn't spoken them in a long time. "It's all okay now." The colt blinked. A tiny movement, almost nothing. But it was enough. Enough for her to see something hiding deep inside him. A small spark trying to stay alive. She named him Timmy. Leading him to the trailer was slow and painful. Every sound made him jump. Every shadow made him freeze. But he walked. He trusted her just enough to step forward. When the trailer door shut, Susan leaned her forehead against the cold metal and let her tears fall for the first time since the day her world ended. She wasn't just taking home a starved colt. She was taking home a reflection of her own broken heart. The first week at the ranch was lonely. Timmy stood in the far corner of the fresh paddock, so still he barely seemed alive. He wouldn't eat unless she walked away. He shook at the sound of her boots on the dirt. His past had carved fear deep into his bones. At night, Susan sat in Harry's old office, reading his journals. His notes were full of gentle wisdom written in a looping hand. Words about patience, trust, and healing. "Don't push," one line said. "Let the horse come to you." So she tried. Morning and night, she brought fresh water and warm mash. Then she sat 20 yards away on a hay bale with Harry's favorite book of poems. She read out loud with a soft voice that carried across the quiet pasture. She wasn't reading to Timmy. She was reading to the silence in her life. On the 7th night, as the sun settled behind the Bighorn Mountains in a soft orange glow, Timmy lifted his head. His ears turned toward her voice. He took one slow step. Then another. He didn't come close. He only looked at her. But in that long, trembling look, something shifted. A door opened, and for the first time, Susan felt the faintest, warm flicker of hope. Timmy's first touch of trust came in the soft brush of his muzzle against her hand when she offered him an apple the next evening. It happened slow, so slow she barely breathed as he stepped toward her with careful, trembling legs. His nostrils flared at her scent, testing the air, waiting for danger. Susan kept her hand steady, fingers open, palm flat. When he finally reached forward and snatched the apple with a nervous clack of teeth, he bolted back a few steps, shaking hard. But the tiny warm spot on her palm burned like a brand. It was the first time he had reached for her instead of away. It was the first victory. Days blended into weeks. Susan kept her movement slow and her voice gentle. She read to him at sunrise and at sunset, letting the words roll across the quiet Wyoming ranch like a steady river. With each passing day, Timmy's ribs softened beneath new muscle. His dull coat began to show hints of copper under the dust. His eyes, once hollow like old burned-out lanterns, started to reflect the world again. He let her brush him for the first time on a warm afternoon. The mountains glowed pink as she ran a currycomb in small circles across his shoulder. Timmy stood tense, his breath shaky, but he didn't move away. She felt him choosing to stay, choosing her. That was when she found it. It was hidden beneath a patch of scar tissue on his left hip, a small shape, faint and elegant. She trimmed the hair around it with blunt scissors, her hands gentle, almost afraid to hurt him. As the scarred skin came into view, Susan felt her breath freeze in her chest. A shooting star arcing over a crescent moon. It was too neat, too meaningful to be random. But it also didn't match any ranch brand she'd seen in Wyoming. It looked almost important. Her heart pounded with questions she had no way to answer. The next afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills, a neighbor's old pickup backfired on the road. The sound cracked like a gunshot through the calm air. Timmy exploded. He leapt sideways so hard he slammed into the fence with a violent crack that made Susan cry out. He scrambled to his feet, fresh blood seeping from a new cut, and ran to the far corner of the pasture. His whole body shook like a leaf in a storm. All the progress they'd made shattered in an instant. For the next 3 days, he wouldn't come near her, wouldn't touch his feed unless she walked far away, wouldn't look at her, even when she whispered to him the way Harry used to whisper to frightened horses. Doubt wrapped around her heart like ice. Maybe she had been foolish. Maybe Jed was right. Maybe she was giving everything she had to a horse too broken to heel. But the answer came in roaring winds. One night, a storm rolled down from the mountains like a living beast. Black clouds surged overhead. Rain hammered the tin roof of the barn. Thunder cracked so loud the earth seemed to jump beneath her boots. Susan was in the barn, struggling to latch the big door, when another blinding flash of lightning lit the pasture. A split second later came the sound she feared most, a loud, splintering crash. She ran outside into the storm, rain slashing at her face. The top rail of the pasture fence lay broken on the ground, shattered by Timmy's panic. His tracks disappeared into the dark hills beyond the ranch. He was gone, hurt, terrified, alone. Her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. She grabbed a flashlight, yelling his name through the storm. Mud sucked at her boots as she stumbled across the pasture, slipping and falling, scrambling back up, refusing to stop. She searched the pastures, the creek bed, the road. Every lightning flash tore the world open for a heartbeat, showing nothing but empty land. Her voice cracked from calling. Her hands shook from cold. Hours passed. Hope drained out of her with the rain. By dawn, the storm had drifted east, leaving the ranch soaked and silent. The sky hung low and heavy, bruised purple with morning light. Susan trudged toward the barn, defeated, her clothes soaked, her heart hollow. Then she saw him. Timmy stood by the broken fence, mud on his legs, his mane dripping with rainwater. His sides rose and fell with tired breaths. But he wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting. When he saw her, he let out a soft, gentle nicker, a sound she had never heard from him before. A sound that held something fragile but real. Trust. He had fled into the storm, but he had come back to her. Her hands trembled as she looped the lead rope around his neck. Tears slipped down her cheeks, mixing with the last drops of rain. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You came home." From that day on, something deep inside him changed. His steps grew bold. His eyes followed her with calm interest instead of fear. And the scars on his mind began to heal the same way the ones on his body did. Slowly but surely. One afternoon, she let him loose in the big pasture with her cows. A young calf bolted toward the fence, frightened by a hawk's shadow. Before Susan even moved, Timmy lowered his shoulder and cut across the pasture with stunning precision. His movements were smooth, fast, natural. He turned the calf gently back toward its mother with the ease of a trained cutting horse. But no one had trained him. He moved like a horse born for greatness. Susan stared, her breath caught. The strange brand, the hidden talent, the scars, something was missing from the puzzle, but she could feel how close she was to understanding. That night, she took a hand-drawn sketch of the brand into town. To Mr. Wade, a man who knew more about horses than anyone alive. He looked at the drawing for a long time, then walked to an old shelf stacked with dusty horse catalogs. His weathered hands flipped page after page until he stopped. There it was. A ranch brand nearly identical to Timmy's, except missing the moon. "Starlight Creek Ranch," he whispered. "Home of the greatest cutting stallion this country's ever seen." Susan's heart thudded hard. Then Mr. Wade flipped another page. A note at the bottom read, "The final foals will carry a special crescent moon." He looked at her with wide, stunned eyes. "Susan, your Colt isn't just any rescue. He is one of the last foals of Starlight Cutter." Her breath caught. Timmy wasn't nobody. He was Starlight's echo, a lost legend. And the world had no idea he was still alive. The day of the county fair dawned bright and warm, the kind of day that made the Wyoming sky look endless. Susan tightened the cinch on Timmy's saddle. No, not Timmy, not anymore. He had another name now, a name heavy with history and hope. Starlight's Echo. But she still called him Timmy when she whispered to him in the quiet mornings. He would always be both to her, the broken colt she rescued and the champion he was born to be. The fairgrounds buzzed with the sounds of children laughing, the smell of cotton candy drifting on the breeze, and the clanging of metal rides. But when Susan led Echo into the arena for the parade of rescued horses, the noise faded into a far-off hum. All she could hear was the steady, calm beat of Echo's breathing beside her leg. He walked with confidence, his copper coat shining in the sun, muscles rippling under the saddle. No one looking at him now would ever believe he had once been nothing but bones and scars. His eyes, once empty and cold, were bright and alert. He listened to Susan's cues with the focus of a horse who trusted his rider completely. The crowd's polite applause felt distant as Susan began telling their story into the microphone. Her voice shook at first, but Echo stood steady beneath her, grounding her. Behind them, a large screen flashed the photo of him from the auction, his bony frame, his dull eyes, his hopeless stance. Gasps rippled through the stands. A few people covered their mouths. Susan saw tears forming in strangers' eyes. "This," she said softly, running her hand along Echo's neck, "is what hope looks like." She asked him for a gentle lope, and he moved into it with fluid grace, like a quiet dance between two partners who understood each other's hearts. They weren't showing off tricks, they were showing trust. Healing. A bond built from ashes. In the front row, Mr. Wade watched with a stunned expression. He wasn't seeing a rescue horse. He was seeing a bloodline thought to be gone forever. He saw Starlight Cutter's spirit in the way Echo shifted his shoulder, the same intelligence in his eyes, the same powerful stride. When Susan brought him to a halt in the center of the arena, the crowd clapped politely. But Mr. Wade was already pushing himself up from his seat. He stepped forward, his voice rising with a strength no one expected from a man his age, a voice that seemed to echo across the whole arena. Starlight's Echo. The name struck the air like lightning. Echo froze, his ears shot forward, his muscles tensed. His eyes widened with recognition, not fear, but something older, deeper, a memory reaching across years of pain. And then he did something no one was ready for. He let out a ringing, powerful whinny, a cry that rose high into the sky and bounced off the walls of the fairground. A cry that made people gasp, stand, press hands to their hearts. It was the sound of a horse who finally heard his true name after years of silence. The crowd went dead quiet. Then Mr. Wade lifted his trembling hand and pointed straight at the horse. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is the last living son of Starlight Cutter. He survived a fire that took his whole herd. And this woman," he pointed at Susan, "saved him when the world threw him away." The applause that followed shook the arena. People stood, people cried. People cheered with a force that washed over Susan like a wave. She buried her face in Echo's warm mane, her tears soaking into his shining coat. For the first time in a long time, her heart felt full. Harry would have been proud of her. She knew it deep in her bones. Echo turned his head and touched his muzzle to her shoulder. A gesture of comfort, a gesture of love, a gesture of home. 1 year later, a new sign hung at the entrance to the ranch. Fresh wood, carved letters, Harry and Susan's Second Chance Ranch. The place that once echoed with grief was alive again. Children laughed in the paddocks. Horses grazed in peaceful pastures. And Echo, strong, healthy, bright, walked among the youth therapy program's kids like he understood every quiet worry they carried. The new girl was the shyest of them all. She hadn't spoken a word since arriving. But now she stood beside Echo, brushing his coat with slow, steady strokes. Her lips moved. She was whispering to him, telling him something she hadn't told anyone else. Echo lowered his head and breathed warm air onto her cheek. A gentle promise. "You see?" Mr. Wade said beside Susan, rocking in an old chair on the porch. "That colt wasn't a mistake. He was meant for this." Susan nodded, her heart warm. "He saved me first," she said softly. Echo lifted his head and looked across the pasture at her. His eyes were steady and full of the quiet strength he'd earned through every scar. He was not the ghost of Lot 113 anymore. He was a living legend, a healer, a second chance made flesh and bone. The world told Susan she had bought a hopeless case, but she had found hope itself. And together, they built a place where broken things came to shine again.